In 2018, IBPK organized public deliberation forums in Murang'a, Turkana and Homa Bay counties. These forums were anchored on the appreciation that decisions on budget priorities are based on trade-offs that ought to be deliberated upon. One of the important facets of the public deliberation forums was the decision-making phase, where participants thought through how to make decisions and ultimately made decisions on how much money they wanted to allocate to each sector under consideration.
Public deliberations, we try and bring that decision making that is made in boardrooms into the actual room where the discussion is happening. So the decision making is supposed to introduce an element where anytime we have public participation, we just don't give a list of the things that we want. We just don't put what we want on the table, but we also decide on what final things are we going to pick from this huge input that comes from the public. And in a way is also to give the public a bit more power in deciding how that they want that decision to be made.
After we've learned about these two sectors, I want all of us as a group now to make the decision on how much money do we think we will give to those sectors based on what we've learned now, and also based on our experience in terms of what those two sectors do. The question is, how do we make this decision? Do you want to make it by consensus? Do you think we will agree? Or do you want to make it by voting? Do you want to do secret ballot? How do you think we should make this decision?
Having been given options for decision-making by the facilitator, participants were given an opportunity to add to the list of options on how they could possibly make the final decision on the sector allocations.
I have an idea.
Yes.
We will have group leaders. Groups will appoint one person. And that person will present the views. And then we will list this group. The majority number of groups that will have that are either pro-infrastructure or pro-education takes the lead.
Anyone else with a different idea?
Okay.
Yes.
I believe consensus, because the majority win, the minority have their say. Like in this group, we did not agree on about it. So we will present what we agreed on, and the dissenting voice will say what maybe is going to us. But it's all of it.
So yours is a bit of a mix,
Yeah.
right? It has a consensus bit because the minority will agree with what the majority said, but it's really a voting thing. The majority will have their way. So yours is a hybrid. So how do you want us to make this decision? Mnaona ni kama tutakubaliana ama tufanye election, unajua to vote? What is the best way to make this decision? Yes? You reason it out. Okay, then you will come to an agreement. Suggestion ya kwanza ya Hesbon ni consensus. Anaona tutaelewana. Kila mtu akiweka point yake kulingana na vile ameona, then we will come to an agreement. Anyone else? Somebody had said voting.
The best thing is to voting.
To vote.
To vote. To decide on the proportion, which proportion we want to. That's how we break the tie.
We need to give an average on all of them and then come to a consensus.
That we need to make informed decisions. We should not just make decisions because they are popular or because what people think. We need to get expert advice. So from the expert advice, they should come, they should tell us what they feel and why they feel about whatever they're going to do. That is when we can vote. So to me, the main thing here is, do we have the information?
I need to make a decision based on my needs.
On your needs?
Yes. Because an expert may be giving me a decision based on something that is taken from elsewhere, not from really what I want. Yes. You could be doing research, you could have done research in a particular area and then you bring it to me and you think or you feel that this probably can be implemented here. But I need to also have my say. I need to look at things and feel I can give what I have back to the expert so that they synthesis and then they look at it and say, now probably we need to do it this way. But first of all, it needs to come from my end.
After participants had been given options and added more options for decision-making, we ended up with 7 modes of decision-making. These were decision by consensus, decision by secret or open voting, decision by a mix of voting and consensus, decision by representatives, decision by mathematical averages of varied allocations, decision based on sector biases and reasoning, decision by experts, although this was contested. We observed that out of the options given and before the actual deliberations and decision-making phase, participants in all 3 counties chose consensus as their preferred mode of decision-making.
The decision today has to be from you and by you alone. So for me, I'll just be guiding the discussion. Number 2, we are going to make this decision as one group. I know we had our own little discussions, and in that discussion, like the group that was here was very animated and very hot. But the decision we are going to make, the 20 of us. So I want you to think of this as a simulation of what could happen in a county. I want you to be very open, that based on your own understanding about what those 2 sectors do, and based on your own understanding about how they perform, how much money they've received before, your own understanding from the environment, about how those sectors are structured and how they work, what proportion of 100% would you give to each of them? The only thing I'll ask is make sure you support your answer in a way that you convince the next person. The first step to making an agreement is convincing the person next to you. So, ukisema education 50 na infrastructure 50, make sure you give a reason that will convince everyone. Na kila mtu aseme yenyewe hapo, chenye amesema ni kweli, hata mimi nimekubali 50-50. Uko sawa sawa? Are we in agreement there?
For me, I would take education 65%. Then I would give infrastructure 35%.
Education is 60.
Yes. So the first option.
Energy is 40.
I was proposing it to be 50-50.
Education should be given more. In this case, 70. And then the other one will get 30.
Kwangu ningeongeza tena 10 nitoe 10 kwa 30 niongeze kwa 70 iwe 80-20 kwa pande education.
Yangu itakuwa education 60, infrastructure 40.
People given time and the right kind of information can actually contribute to a discussion. And they don't need to know the granular details. They don't need to know every last detail of things. But for instance, I mean, we had the sectors that we were having debates around this time, you know, education and infrastructure, you know, and whether to invest more in capital development or in human development. People had ideas, and they were all speaking from the context that they were working from.
Having gone through the learning phase, participants dived into the deliberative and decision-making phase with the help of a facilitator. There are multiple proposals on how much funding should be allocated to each sector.
Not all will be employed in the white-collar jobs, indicating that a lot of resources should go to education such that as many people as possible can be educated, and those ones who cannot be employed in the white-collar jobs can be employed, can self-employ themselves. In the infrastructure, as we have gone through the document, we have found that some sectors can provide money for itself, like the petroleum. It will sell its petrol and it will get its money from elsewhere. So I tend to think education should be given more. In this case, 70. And then the other one will get 30.
I would give infrastructure 60%.
Infrastructure 60?
And give education 40%. Basically, I was looking at, I'm investing in infrastructure and I'm investing in education. After 4 years, we produced 1 million from 4 rivers. 70,000 got to university. Out of the 70,000, 10% are focus and material. The remaining 930,000 are Kulima. They are not adding as much as infrastructure would. Garissa Road was built by NYS sometimes back. NYS guys are trained for 6 months. And they built that road, and it's one of the best roads in the country. So we don't need to put 70% in education so that we produce great minds. We just need to be organized.
60 for education, 40 for AII. Education provides for basic knowledge of language, basic knowledge of our environment, knowledge of innovations. You get to travel, you get to exchange, you get to learn from other places. And all of this can be gotten from attaining a basic education, from a basic to skill-based education. So all these departments cannot be in existence because I don't see a department where you don't need somebody who's educated. Even if someone said there is the informal sector, which constitutes of people who are not educated, but I need to educate you pro bono that those people are aided by people who are educated. I may be working at a construction company as a person who draws water for the builders. There should be a mason, there should be somebody who did the plan. So without those people who actually attained an education, that building cannot be in one piece. So don't just look at the people who are in the informal sector for having not been educated. I'm supporting education for such reasons.
I want you to drive us towards making a decision. Yes. A final one.
Yeah. My friend there said that we have problems with energy. It's because we don't have that knowledge of making energy from the solar. We are always relying on rivers which are drying up. So we have to go up. So I'm saying we can give them, let's say 10, to Bali, 60 for education, 40
for infrastructure. So you've come down 10 percentage points. We are making progress. Do you think there is a compromise that can be made but still meets the objectives of the points that all the people who are speaking about infrastructure actually made? Where is our compromise? We need to make a decision. Naona nilisema tutajipata kwa kwa sababu kuagree haikai rahisi vile ina sound. How do you think we should make this decision? Is it that we can't agree completely? So what is the next option then?
When it came to the actual decision-making, participants had another chance to review their earlier choice on reaching a consensus as the suitable mode of decision-making.
Somebody said, we go to the calculation of the social youth. We are, according to the last resolution of...
Naanza kufanya chenye unasema.
And doing the social protection. We are now going to use the previous mathematics of the groups, like governance, group 1 is 61, group 2 is 75, group 3 is 70, group 4 is 49. Calculating this mathematics, then divide and put the answer to the governance. Alafu kuja tena kwa social protection. Unafanya tena hivyo mpaka mwisho, unadivide na kuweka.
Nataka kuweka tuone kama watu watakubali. Haya, ukifanya hivyo governance justice law and order itapata 64.
Yes. Andika.
You kweli. Kwa hivyo ile inabaki. Are you thinking of the 85%? The recurrent expenditure. Governance. Hiyo inashuka.
Yes.
Sasa tuko na proposal yenye ni moja. Sasa nataka tufanye kazi na hiyo moja. So governance, justice, law and order 64, social protection 36. Now, what changes do we want to make to those numbers in any way? So we are dealing with one number. Sasa tumefanya hesabu ya hizi. Tumemaliza. So, of these two numbers, and based on the point Dominic is raising, what adjustments do we want to make to these numbers? To a point where we feel it's comfortable and Dominic can say, I think I understand why we have made that final decision and I am comfortable with it.
In the end, participants chose to make their decisions by voting where the proposal from the clear majority was taken. In Turkana, there was a step during the decision-making session where mathematical averages were used.
We asked people during the deliberations, what decision-making process would you prefer, okay? And we gave them options. For example, we told them, you have certain options on how you're going to make decisions. You could vote, or you could decide that you're going to decide via consensus, or you could use both, or you could just map how you want to make your decisions, okay? So that's the first part of the decision-making process. Then people came to us and told us what we prefer, which is what you'll see in most counties, is that we prefer consensus. But when you look at what happened, in the end, people just ended up voting.
Si tulisema tutaenda tu na consensus. Tutaelewana. Sana nataka tuelewane. Are we going to give more money to education, or are we going to give more money to infrastructure? So how do we make this final decision? Tupige kura. Kupiga kura ilikataliwa haraka sana mara ya kwanza. Sasa inaanza kuonekana kama option, eh? How many for more for infrastructure? How many for education? How many more for education at 60% and 40% for infrastructure? So we had, how many, 3? Oh, the number has gone up? 4. Oh, 5. I think, do I need to 7? Oh, things are going bad, people. Infrastructure, 60%, and education, 40%. How many? 13. Okay, everyone has voted. Hata hakuna mtu ame-abstain.
So start with the first one. How many would like us to allocate 40 to energy and 60 to education? By show of hands.
50-50.
50-50.
Kenyans are very optimistic people. In all the 3 counties, when you asked people how they wanted to make the decision, what they said is, we will come to a consensus, we'll come to an agreement, right? So we don't need to vote. But then what actually happened when it got to the point where they had to make a decision, then consensus never carried the day, right? So what happened in many cases is either people did mathematical averages or people voted. So the thinking around how decisions can be made during these forums play out quite differently when it comes to the point where they actually have to make the decision. But having an open space, right, where people can change their mind and people can work with what is most comfortable for them, I think is something that is definitely good. So Kenyans would like to make these decisions in a way that is agreeable to everyone, and they can hold hands and sing kumbaya about budgets, but when it actually came to making the decision, things really changed.